Hello, book lovers and English learners. Welcome to our October live read along. I'm Lydie Bureau and I'm an English teacher in France. I'm also the founder of Lydie's Book Club, a book club for learners of English. In this book club, I host live readings of workshops, of adaptations of classics of literature and contemporary novels in their original text and sometimes adaptations as well. But we also read original text. I also tend to prioritize books that are written by women. Each month, we read and explore a different book for all levels of English. And at the end of each reading week, we meet with the members of the book club in a live workshop via Zoom to discuss the chapters read over that week. And this month we are reading the C1 Advanced Adaptation of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. This is a 2008 Penguin Readers edition. So fairly dated, but still relevant and a great material to explore, to use as well as a teacher, and for you as reader to have in your hand and be able to have the chance to read the novel, to get an extract of the novel, because as I mentioned, the original text is fairly different from the different size of the pages. So you can see all my little annotations here. So it's so great to be able to read the original text, of course, and I hope you will be able to do so at some point. But for now, let's continue reading this novel. We read the first session yesterday, and today it's our second live reading session. And if you want to know more about the novel and Elizabeth Gaskell's work, I invite you to listen to the podcast episode 25, An Introduction to Elizabeth Gaskell and North and South, which is a podcast that I posted here on YouTube, on my YouTube channel, but also on Spotify podcast called Read in English. So I have recorded this podcast live as well, and it is now available for you to watch or listen. So today, as I was mentioning, this is our second live reading session, and we are going to read chapters 3 and 4. And this Sunday, I will host the first live workshop session, and we will discuss chapters 1 to 4. So the 4 chapters that we read this week. So if you want to attend this live session, you just need to subscribe to the book club. So just click on the link in the description and you will find my website and all the information will be there. You can find all the information of upcoming dates, of live readings and workshops on my website as well, so that you know more or less the schedule. And you can join at any time for the live workshops. So it's all fine. And once you join in, you have access to all the previous recording, all the workshop, all the previous workshop that we have recorded. So all my Instagram lives and live readings are recorded and are available here. That's why you're able to watch it now. And so if you want to read past books then you can find them. You can browse on my YouTube channel all the books that we have read so far. And yeah, you can watch on replay and listen to it as well. All the live readings are also available on Spotify podcast. Right. So that being said, hello, Etienne. Welcome today. Um, so now let's recap the chapters that we have read yesterday. This is usually how I work. So uh, I do a little recap to refresh your memory if you have forgotten or if you didn't get the time to listen to the live reading or just to read the chapters. So it's a quick heads up of what is happening in the novel. So far, so we discover, well, we uh, get to know the main character, Margaret, here. So here it's an adaptation, the picture from the BBC the BBC series, BBC adaptation of the book. So it's a TV show, a mini series TV show. And you can see here the actress playing Margaret, which is this actress here. And here you have Mr. Thornton, and they are outside at on the premises of the of the factory, sorry. So Mr. Thornton is a mill owner. And no, what am I saying? No, he's not a mill owner. He's a um, factory owner, and he produces cotton. Yeah. Um, so we meet Margaret here, our main character, and we learn that she has been living with her aunt and her cousin, Edith, in London because her parents live in the south of England, in the countryside, and she had the chance to be raised in and to grow up in London in a very luxurious um, environment. And she visits her parents only over the holidays. But now this is coming to an end because her cousin Edith is going to get married to Captain Lennox, and she is going to move out in to live in Corfu, I think. Corfu, um, yes, is it Corfu? Yeah, in Greece. And so Margaret has to leave London and the house of her aunt Shaw. So there is a mixture of bitterness and excitement for her to get married, but yeah, it's bittersweet, I would say. We could say so. They are sort of getting everything ready for the marriage, for the wedding, but Edith is asleep at this point, at the very beginning. So Margaret is trying to wake her up, but she's she can't wake her. Well, she can't because her cousin is in a deep sleep. So in a very deep one. So it's quite interesting to see that she's sleeping while she knows that the she's about to get married. Doesn't seem to be very worried or anything. Um, that's quite interesting here. And we get to um, know as well another character, um, Mr. Lennox, who is um, Captain Lennox's brother. And he's quite Henry Lennox, yes. And he's quite smitten by Margaret in the sense that he has some feelings for her. So Margaret moves back to Helston. So that's chapter two, where her parents live in the south of England. And there she um, is um, she's quite surprised to realize that her mother is not quite happy living in the countryside. She finds herself very isolated living in this house, and she feels isolated from the city center and or from the village center, I would say, and also from the Gormans, who are family, which is a family in war who made their fortune in trade, actually, in Southampton, and she's quite saddened to be living far from their house, and we here have a first encounter of Margaret's character towards trade people. And she was educated, well, in London, to despise people in trade. And she is having quite an argument here, or kind of she's here expressing her opinion against the trade people and the fact that their job is not really respectable compared to farmers and um, and educated or yeah, compared to farmers, or yeah, she compares them to people working on the land, who she admires them more, who she admires uh, more. Um, and then we also learn, well, we learn as at the same time as Margaret does, that her father has lost his faith in the Catholic in the Church of England, which is a form of which is a form of Christianity, and um, and here we understand Elizabeth Gaskell's influence from the Unitarianism movement, which is another branch of Christianism that is more tolerant and towards other religion and other beliefs, and also oriented towards helping the poor and elevating social status and yeah, um, social um, status from poor people, elevate them. Um, the way working class and poor people are living. So raise their um, life. Um, sorry, raise their way of living. Okay, very much sorry. This is the end of the day, and I apologize in advance if uh, I find a bit of time to express myself and to articulate my thoughts. Um, my apologies if I'm a bit slow tonight. So yes, she is quite baffled by the fact that her father has decided that they are going to move to the north of England in Milton Northern, and which is a made up name, but it refers to Manchester, actually, where Elizabeth Gaskell's used to live. So that's the news that Margaret learns, and that her father announced to her. And at the same time, she also has to face the fact that her father did not inform her mother. So her mother doesn't know, Mrs. Hale, doesn't know about her husband's decision. So it's Margaret who has the hard task to do the announcement to her mother. So she find herself in this position, having the responsibility to announce her mother that her father decided to go up to north of England to become a teacher, well, to become a tutor, to teach, well, I would say literature and um, I can't remember what word is, but yeah, to become a tutor for um, gentlemen in the north, so people for trades men who want to educate themselves and have a little bit of education, or more, or kind of enhance their um, knowledge in literature and also philosophy, sort of, um, which is completely different from their from business and what from their daily life, and that's what Mr. Hell is going to do in north of England, and he feels that he's going to be more useful there rather, and he feels that he cannot stay in the south of England, or where they here in Helston, um, because of the fact that he doesn't believe it the same way as the Church of England does, and it doesn't feel aligned with what the church is asking from him. So that's where we left off, and also with the fact that now Margaret has the hard task to organize the whole moving because her mother is completely um, caught up by this news, and she is quite a fragile character. She, the fact that she's not fully happy in her environment, affect her health. So, learning that now they have to move to the north of England is another blow, and it puts her in a depressed mode. So, and her father is a little bit sad as well, and is not very happy either, and to have the feeling that to to feel that he has to move, and not being um, accepted by the Helston's society, well, or the Church of England, and not feeling that he can do his work there. So he's not really in his right mind as well. So, well, it's Margaret who has to arrange everything. So, a private tutor, yes. So, her dad is going to become a private tutor and teach manufacturers. And actually, he has already a potential student, Mr. Thornton, to teach him some ancient Greek literature and also and other authors, of course. And he got this position thanks to Mr. Bell, his old friend, that we will see later on again. Well, we don't see him here, but I mean, he's going to be mentioned later on as well. And also, a last important event is Henry Lennox, if you remember, the brother of Captain Lennox. He is studying, well, he's a lawyer, and he is he's having feelings for Margaret, uh, and he at some point come to visit her in Helston after she left London, and attempt to declare his love to her, or attempt to propose, but she refused him. She likes him, but that's it. She doesn't want to get married to him. She doesn't want to marry him. So this poor Mr. Henry Lennox is very disappointed, as you can imagine. And yeah, he reacts in a very funny way, in the sense that he pretends that uh, nothing, that it doesn't really affect him that she rejected him, or it just is having quite an odd attitude afterwards. And actually, Margaret doesn't like much this the way he reacted, but obviously he's disappointed. So that's that for him. Okay, so now chapter 3. Let's get started. The move to Milton Northern. The Hale family left Helston early one morning to take a train to London. The vicarage, half covered with roses, looked lovelier than ever in the morning sun, and they found it hard to believe they would never see it again. So the vicarage is where they live. It's the resident, well, um, the property. sorry. So the property where they live because is so Mr. Hell is a clergyman, and the place, well, the fact that well, the place is called a vicarage, um, because I guess his house is probably next to the church or close to it. Hello, Kitty. Welcome tonight. Okay, I just started chapter 3, just at the beginning. Um, so the vicarage, half covered with roses, looked lovelier than ever in the morning sun, and they found it hard to believe they would never see it again. Margaret, who was looking very pale, appeared calm, but her heart was aching. Aching it means that she felt a big a pain in her heart. She leaned back in her seat and shut her eyes, and the tears rolled slowly down her cheeks. So she's very sad, of course. They spent a night in London at a quiet hotel, and the next day took the train to Helston, a small seaside town about 20 miles from Milton, Northern. Margaret's plan was that her mother and Dixon, so Dixon is Mrs. Hell's maid, and she's known her for well, Dixon was her maid even before she got married, and Dixon doesn't really like the fact that Mrs. Hale married a clergyman with no real money, really. So he's not rich, basically, and she doesn't like the fact that she picked him, and she feels very protective towards Mrs. Hale. Um, Margaret's plan was that her mother and Dixon could stay there while she and her father went to Milton Northern to look for a house. They found clean, cheerful rooms in Heston, and she felt able to rest at last. But the future must be met, however difficult it may be. One morning, Margaret and her father set off for Milton Northern. As they approached the town, they saw that a dark grey cloud hung over it, and the air started to taste and smell slightly of smoke. Ooh. Soon they were traveling through long, straight streets of small brick houses. Huge factories sent out clouds of black smoke, and the streets were crowded with people. They found their hotel, which was near the center of the town, and left immediately to begin their search. There was no much money to spend on rent, and it was difficult to find a house that was big enough for their needs. So, because they leave the vicarage, now they find themselves having little money to live on. So they really have to be very careful with their spending. There was not much, sorry. After some hours, Margaret said, I think we should go back to the second house, the one in Crampton. That was the name of the suburb, I think. But the colors and the wallpaper. Surely you can ask the landlord to repaper one or two of the rooms, and the bookshelves will hide some of the walls. Then you think we should take it? If you do, so she's discussing with her father. And then, so her father says, you think we should take it? If you do, I will take you back to the hotel and you can have lunch and rest while I visit the landlord. I only hope he will agree to repaper the rooms. As Margaret entered the hotel, a waiter came to tell her that Mr. Thornton was waiting in their rooms to see them. Margaret went in to meet him in her usual fearless way. She was used to London society and was not at all shy. Mr. Thornton was much more surprised and uncomfortable than she was. Instead of a quiet, middle-aged clergyman, here was a young woman who was very different to those he usually met. She wore a simple, dark silk dress and a large Indian shawl that made her look like an Eastern queen. Her gaze was direct and completely uninterested. So this is the first encounter between Mr. Thornton and Margaret. So as you can see, she arrives. So Margaret arrives, enters the room with assurance and confidence, while Mr. Thornton is not expecting to see a woman, but instead he is expecting to see her father. And so he's taken by her beauty as well, and her presence as well. Mr. Thornton, I believe, said Margaret. Will you sit down? My father will return soon. He has gone to see Mr. Donkins, the landlord of a house in Crampton that my father wishes to take. Mr. Thornton had promised Mr. Bell that he would do his best to help Mr. Hale, and he had been to look at a house in Crampton. He had thought that it was perfect, but now that he had met Margaret, he was not sure. So remember, Mr. Thornton is a friend of Mr. Bell, or kind of an acquaintance of Mr. Bell. And so he picked the houses that they visited for them. And now seeing Margaret, he feels that maybe the house is not worth the, doesn't, is not up to, doesn't, is not necessarily as good as the house should be for such a beautiful woman. So he, or beautiful, but also in the sense that respectable for this very respectable woman. Or the idea that he has of her, and by her presence and her posture. Uh, So he had thought that it was perfect, but now he had met Margaret, he was not sure. Margaret's short upper lip, strong chin, and the way she moved her head and body always made strangers think that she was haughty. She sat directly opposite Mr. Thornton, and he had to admit that she was very beautiful, with her white neck and graceful curves. But her obvious lack of interest made him feel like a rough and civilized fellow, and he was not sure he liked her. He thought that her quiet, calm manner was rather disdainful, and he was telling himself that he would leave when Mr. Hale entered and apologized in his pleasant way for not being there to meet him. So he was about to go when Mr. Hale entered. So I couldn't go anymore. The two men began to talk about their friend, Mr. Bell, and Margaret moved to the window and watched the street. Margaret, said Mr. Hale suddenly, the landlord refused to change the wallpaper. Oh dear, she said, and began to think of ways of hiding it. Her father invited Mr. Thornton to have lunch with them, but since Margaret did not add her own invitation, Mr. Thornton felt unable to accept. He left, feeling more uncomfortable than ever in his life before. So Mr. Hill invites him for lunch, but Margaret doesn't say anything. So it doesn't feel like she wants him to be there. And what is Mr. Thornton like? She asked. Oh, I don't know. She asked, and I don't know, said Margaret. Oh, I think there is a mistake here in the printing. I think he asked. Oh, yeah, so the father asks. Oh, I don't know, said Margaret, who was feeling tired. He's tall, broad-shouldered man of about 30. I think, about 30, I think, with a face that is not ugly but not handsome either. He's not quite a gentleman, but one would not expect that. Of course, he's a tradesman, so he can't be a gentleman. He's not a coarse man, said her father. Oh no, said Margaret. His expression is much too powerful and determined. It looks like what he is, a great tradesman. Don't call the Milton cotton manufacturers tradesmen, Margaret, said her father. They are very different. Hmm. So here, um, Mr. Hell makes a point of making the difference between manufacturers and tradesmen. Hmm. So tradesmen are more people kind of speculating in with money and more in the sense of yeah, dealing with business and um, making business deal and so on, rather than manufacturers who are um, factory owners who employ people and it seems for Mr. Hale that they are more respectable than tradesmen. They, yeah, we'll see. Are they? I use the word for those who have something to sell. Oh, mother, you must prepare yourself for the sitting room wallpaper. Pink and blue roses with yellow leaves. Oh, mother. Oh, it's an expression. Oh, mother, you must prepare yourself for sitting, uh, for sitting room wallpaper. Pink and blue roses with yellow leaves. So they don't seem to like their wallpapers in the house they are going to rent. But when they moved to the house in Milton, the landlord had changed the wallpaper. They did not know that when Mr. Thornton, the wealthy manufacturer, asked for something to be done, people hurried to obey. So remember, Mr. Hale said that, well, apparently the landlord couldn't change the wallpaper. And then after meeting Mr. Thornton, then they did. So you can see how powerful Mr. Thornton in the Milton Northern. It was difficult for the family to feel comfortable in their new home. The thick yellow November fogs crept up to the windows and through every open door. Mrs. Hale was miserable and caught a bad cold. Mr. Hale was equally miserable and came to Margaret for sympathy, but she was unable to comfort him. The move to Milton had spent nearly all the move to Milton had spent nearly all their money. Here they were, and here they must remain. At night, when Margaret realized this, she felt quite despairing. The heavy, smoky air hung in her bedroom, and all she could see from her window was a blank wall. A letter from Edith arrived describing her new life in her pretty house overlooking the sea. It was a life without any problems. Margaret wondered if her old friends thought about her at all. What would her life have been like? What would her life have been like if she had agreed to marry Henry Lennox? But she knew he would have found it very difficult to accept her father's changed position in society. Mr. Hale found several pupils recommended by either Mr. Bell or Mr. Thornton. There were mostly schoolboys, and Mr. Thornton was probably the oldest of Mr. Hale's students. He was certainly the favorite. Mr. Hale quoted his opinions so often that it became a family joke to wonder how much time the man spent studying when so much time was spent in conversation. So here, probably the mother and daughter are joking around about the fact that Mr. Thornton and Mr. Hale, spend more time chatting than actually learning, or well, Mr. Hale teaching actually his student, Mr. Thornton. One of Margaret's tasks was to find a servant to help Dixon in the kitchen. The rough girls who had replied to their advertisements were not at all suitable. So Margaret went up and down the Milton streets, visiting shops, looking for a girl who Dixon would accept. But all the girls she saw preferred to work at a mill, where the wages were better. In London, when Margaret went out walking, she had always been accompanied by a servant. But here, she walked alone. Among the crowds who poured in and out, or poured in and out of the factories, they came rushing along with loud voices and fearless faces, and at first they frightened her. The girls commented on her clothes and sometimes even touched them without asking her. But they were not unfriendly. The undisguised admiration of the man upset her, however, as she had never received this kind of attention before. She was returning home one day when a middle-aged worker said as he passed her, "A face as pretty as yours should always be smiling." The man looked so weighed down with worries that she smiled at him, and he smiled back. Whenever they passed each other again, they did not speak, but a silent recognition grew between them. Once or twice she saw him walking with an unhealthy-looking girl, apparently his daughter. One morning in May, she had been to pick flowers in the countryside and was walking back home when she met the couple. She offered the flowers to the girl, and the girl's pale blue eyes lit up as she took them. "Thank you, miss. That's kind of you," said the man. You're not from round here, I didn't think." "No," said Margaret, half sighing. "I come from the south." The girl was walking very slowly, and Margaret turned to her and said sweetly, "I'm afraid you're not very strong." "No," said the girl, "and I never will be." "Spring is here," said Margaret. "It won't do me any good." "She's right, poor girl," said the man. Margaret felt shocked, but also interested. "Where do you live?" she asked. 9 Francis Street. "And your name?" "I must not forget that." "Nicholas Higgins, and she's called Bessie Higgins." "I would like to come and see you," said Margaret shyly. "I don't like strangers in my house," said the man, but seeing Margaret's expression, added, "You may come if you like." As the couple turned to go their own way, the girl said, "You won't forget to come and see us." "She'll come. I can see it in her face," said her father impatiently. "Come on, Bess. The mill bell is ringing." Margaret went home, thinking about her new friends, glad that she had found a human interest. From that day, Milton seemed a brighter place to her. And that's the end of chapter 3. So you can see that the beginning of their the settlement in of their arrival, I would say, is quite hard for their for Margaret's parents, mainly, but also for Margaret. It's quite difficult, and you can see the difference in um, social mm, code in a way, especially for women, as in London, she would never walk on her own. She would always have a maid with her, or a servant. And whereas here in Milton, well, they can't afford uh, a new servant. Actually, she's trying to find a new one, but they rather go to work in the mill um, than being employed than be a servant and being employed by families and by her family. So, and they probably seem to earn a little bit more as a male worker. So here in Milton, she is quite free in a way. She doesn't need a chaperone, or she is quite on her own. She can walk in the street, uh, and um, and she finds it quite, I think, strange to adapt. So, um, so this is new way. She has to adapt herself to this new way of life of living. Chapter 4, New Friends. The day after Margaret's meeting with Higgins and his daughter, Mr. Hale, Miss, oh, sorry. The day after Margaret's meeting with Higgins and his daughter, Mr. Hale nervously informed his wife and daughter that he had invited Mr. Thornton to tea that night. Mr. Thornton? And tonight? What does that man want to come here for? Mrs. Hale said, with the expression of pain on her face that had recently become habitual. So she's always having a kind of a dark, not dark, but a very strict or not very agreeable face. And quite negative attitude towards Miss Thornton. But since the invitation had been given, preparations had to be made, and Margaret spent the day ironing in the kitchen while Dixon made cakes. And here again, Mr. Hill take the decision to invite Mr. Thornton without asking his wife. So here again, we can see that the husband is making the decision without consulting his wife or daughter. So they have to deal with it. When Mrs. Helm saw her daughter's tired face, she was upset. If anyone had told me when I was Miss Beresford that a child of mine would have to work in the kitchen like a servant, preparing to entertain a tradesman. Oh, mother, said Margaret, I don't mind what kind of work I do, if it's for you and father. And poor Mr. Thornton can't help being a tradesman with his education. I don't suppose he could do anything else. Well, she seems to be a bit more soft on Mr. Thornton here. Well, Margaret, I mean. In Mr. Thornton's house, a similar In Mr. Thornton's house, a similar yet different scene was taking place. A large boned woman in her late 60s with strong features and a severe expression sat sewing in an expensively decorated dining room. She was busy mending a long tablecloth when her son entered the room. John, I thought you were going to tea with that friend of Mr. Bell's. I am, Mother. I've come home to change my clothes. Change your clothes? Why should you put on your best clothes to have a cup of tea with an old clergyman? Mr. Hale is a gentleman, and his wife and daughter are ladies. You have never mentioned his family before. I've only met the daughter, and that was for half an hour. Don't let her try to catch you, John. You're a rich man. Miss Thornton frowned. Mother, when I met her, she treated me as if she was a queen, and I was a servant. You need not worry. He left the room. As if she was sorry, it's the mother talking. As if she was a queen, and he was a servant? Mrs. Thornton thought aloud. Where could a woman find another man like John? He has the best heart I ever knew. I hate her. Mr. Thornton arrived at the Hales house at exactly 7:30. Mr. Hale greeted him kindly and introduced him to his wife, whose pale face and tired manner suggested that she was not well. It was getting dark, and Margaret was lighting the lamp as he entered. Looking around the sitting room, the mill owner was impressed by its prettiness and style. Somehow, it was much more comfortable and attractive than any of the rooms in his own large house. Margaret was serving the tea, and her movements were so graceful that at first he could not take his eyes off her. But soon he and Mr. Hale began discussing a subject that interested them both: the relationship between the mill owners and the workers. Let's see. Now, it was Margaret's turn to watch Mr. Thornton and notice how different he was to her father. While Mr. Hale's expression was soft and dreamy, Mrs. Thornton's eyes seemed to want to enter the heart of everything he looked at. He rarely smiled, but when he did, it had the effect of sudden sunlight. Margaret liked Mr. Thornton's smile. It was the first thing she had admired in her father's new friend. So she's not so harsh on him. It seems like she's here changing a little bit of her assumptions on him her first impression on him. I won't deny that I am proud of belonging to a manufacturing town, said Mr. Thornton to Mr. Hale. I would rather be a working man here than a rich man in the South, living a dull, lazy life. Hearing this, Margaret felt so angry that her face reddened. Reddened, though it became red. You do not know anything about the South. There is less trade there. There is also less suffering. I see men in the streets here who work so hard they look ill. And may I say, you do not know the North? Said Mr. Thornton gently, seeing that he had really hurt Margaret. But she did not answer, and so he continued the conversation with Mr. Hale. At the beginning of this century, the mill owners had almost unlimited power. We have much less power now. Now there are more factories and more men are needed. So the relationship between the mill owners and the workers are more evenly balanced. One cannot say we will win the battle. Must you call it a battle between the two classes? Asked Mr. Hale. But it is a battle. Those who are successful work harder and behave more wisely than those who are not. And it is an unfortunate truth that lazy and foolish people will always oppose those who are successful. If I understand you correctly, you consider all those who are not successful in the world, for whatever reason, as your enemies, then? Said Margaret in a clear, cold voice. As their own enemies, certainly, said Miss Thornton quickly, hurt by the disapproval in her voice. But he felt that he should explain his meaning more clearly. He knew he could best illustrate what he wanted to say by telling them something about his own life. Feeling a little shy, so that his face went slightly red, he continued. I say this because of my own experiences. 16 years ago, my father died in very miserable circumstances. I was taken from school and had to become a man in only a few days. Fortunately, I had a very strong and determined mother. We went to live in a small country town. There, I found work in a clothes shop, and the money I earned, which was very little, had to support my mother, my sister, and myself. My mother taught me to save a little money each week, and in this way I learned self-control. Now that I can afford to look after her in the way she deserves, I thank her silently for teaching me this valuable lesson. I believe that unsuccessful people have not bothered to learn it, and so I feel content for them. Margaret did not reply to this speech, and soon Mr. Thornton got up to leave. He shook hands with Mr. and Mrs. Hale, then went towards Margaret to shake hands with her too, as was the custom in Milton. But it was not the custom in the South, and Margaret just bowed. So she just said this instead of shaking his hand, which is a bit more, well, yeah, it's just different custom. And she just bowed. Although, as soon as she saw the hand half extended, then quickly withdrawn, she was sorry she had not been aware of his intention. So there is here a miscommunication, I guess. Mr. Thornton, however, did not realize this and walked off angrily, telling himself that she was the proudest, most unpleasant girl he had ever met. So the fact that she bowed, he found it as offending, offending to him, as an offense to him. Yeah. Or, yeah. So he's got upset now. Margaret, said Mr. Hale, after Mr. Thornton had left, I could not help watching your face when Mr. Thornton confessed that he had been a shop boy. I was aware of it because Mr. Bell had told me, but I half expected you to get up and leave the room. Oh, father, do you really think I am so silly? I liked the story of his childhood more than anything else he said. Everything else disgusted me. He was so hard. He didn't seem to realize that other people may not have received the training his mother gave him, or that it was his duty to help the less fortunate. But I did like the way he spoke about himself so simply, and with such love and respect for his mother. I heard a lot about his early life from Mr. Bell before we came here, said Mr. Hale. And as he had told you part of it, I will tell you the rest. His father lost all his money and then killed himself. After his death, no one offered to help the family. Mr. Bell said they had very little to eat for years. But when the young man had made enough money, he visited all the people whom his father owed money to and began to pay them back. It was done very quietly, but finally he paid all his father's debts. It helped him that Mr. Bell, one of the people his father owed money to, invited him to work with him. That was a very fine thing for Mr. Thornton to do, said Margaret. It's such a pity then that wealth is the only thing that matters to him. She was getting, obviously coming from they're not wealthy, but middle class family, not having to care much about money, that she would say something like that. She was getting up to leave the room, as she said, and living in London, she had a very comfortable life as well. So she doesn't really realize that how hard it is to be poor. She was getting up to leave the room as she said this, and just as she was opening the door, she said, "Father, I do think that Mr. Thornton is a very unusual man, but I don't like him at all." "And I do," said her father, laughing, "although I don't see him as a hero or anything like that. But good night, child. Your mother looks very tired tonight." Margaret had noticed her mother's unhealthy appearance in recent weeks, and it had made her anxious. Realizing from her father's remark that he had noticed it too, she felt even more fearful. There were good reasons to worry about her mother's health. Their life in Milton was so different from the way they had lived in Helston, where they had spent much of their time outside in fresh country air. In Milton, the air was heavy with factory smoke, and Mrs. Hale did not like going out much. And then there were the financial worries and the difficulty in finding a servant. There were other signs that something was wrong. Margaret sometimes heard her mother and Dixon talking in low voices in the bedroom. Dixon would come out crying, which was the way she behaved when Mrs. Hale was very upset about something. Margaret suspected that her mother had some secret about her health that she was not telling her. That night, she lay awake for hours, planning ways in which she could help. If she could find a servant to help Dixon with her duties, then Dixon could give her mother the attention she had been accustomed to she had been accustomed to all her life. Margaret spent the next few days looking for a servant, but without success. One afternoon, she met Bessie Higgins in the street and stopped to talk to her. "Bessie, how are you?" "Better, I hope, now that it's warmer." "Better and not better, if you see what I mean." "Not exactly," said Margaret, smiling. "I'm not coughing, so I'm better in that way, but I'm tired of Milton, and I want to go to a better place." For a minute or two, Margaret did not speak. Then she said in a low voice, "Bessie, do you really wish to die?" "That's the other place, heaven." Bessie replied, "If you lived the life I've lived and been as sick as I have, then you'd be glad enough when the doctor said he feared you'd never see another winter." "Why, Bessie? What kind of a life have you had? If you'd come to my house when you said you would, I could maybe have told you." "I've been very busy," said Margaret quietly. "But may I go home with you now?" Seeing from Margaret's soft, friendly expression that she was sincere, Bessie said, "You may come if you want." They walked together in silence until they reached a narrow, dirty street. When they entered the house, Margaret saw that a girl younger than Bessie, but taller, was washing clothes in a rough, capable way, making a lot of noise as she did so. Bessie sat down breathless and exhausted, and closed her eyes. Margaret asked the sister, who was called Mary, to fetch a glass of water, and Bessie drank it and felt better. She asked Margaret where she had lived before Milton, and Margaret described Helston to her, doing her best to describe its beauty. I used to think once that if I could have a day of doing nothing, a day in some quiet place like the one you described, I would feel better, Bessie said. But now I've had so many days of doing nothing, and I'm just as tired as when I was at work. I was well until I was well until mother died, but soon after that, I got sick. It was when I began to work in a part of the factory where the air was filled with white dust from the cotton. They saw the dust. They say the dust gets into your lungs and you start coughing blood. Can't they do something about it? Asked Margaret, shocked. There's a great wheel they can use to blow away the dust, but it costs a lot of money. They didn't have one at our factory. How old are you? Asked Margaret. 19 in July. And I too am 19. Thinking of the contrast between them, Margaret could not speak for a moment. Then, seeing that Bessie was becoming even more tired, she said, I must go. I will come again as soon as I can, but if I don't come for a week or two, don't think I've forgotten you. I may be busy. I know you'll come again, but remember, in a week or two, I may be dead and buried. I come as soon as I can, said Margaret, holding Bessie's hand in hers for a moment. From that day, Mrs. Hale seemed to become more and more unwell. It was about 10 months since Edith's marriage, and looking back, Margaret saw so many difficulties, but there had been moments of real pleasure, and it was a comfort to her that she and her mother were becoming closer at last. One evening, when Mr. Hale was away, Mrs. Hale began to talk about Frederick. So Frederick, remember, is Margaret's brother. And he left England, and there is a secret around his departure from England. And the thing is also that now he is not able to come back. Otherwise, he will be arrested and sentenced to death or jail. She explained that he had taken the name of Dickinson so that he would not be recognized. She told Margaret to go to her desk and open a drawer where she would find his letters. Margaret carried the yellow, sea-stained letters to her mother, who untied the string that held them together with trembling fingers. She gave them to Margaret to read, and at the same time told her the story of the mutiny, as she had learned it from Frederick. So Margaret knew part of the reasons why Frederick left, and but she didn't have all the information. So now her mother is telling her everything. Captain Reed, the captain of the Russell, Frederick's ship. So Frederick was in the Navy. Had been a cruel man who treated his men so badly that one of them had died. The man had mutinied and put Captain Reed off the Russell, sending him out in a boat with some of his officers. The boat had been found some days later by a West Indian ship. Frederick, who was one of the most senior officers, had been among those who had mutinied. Reporting the incident, the English newspapers had named him as one of those responsible for the mutiny and said that he ought to be hung by the neck. He found injustice, he fought injustice, and I am proud of him, said Mrs. Hale in her weak voice. But I wish I could see him once more. It is 7 years ago. Would they still hang him, mother? Some of the sailors who mutinied were captured and tried in court. They were hanged. The worst thing was that the court said that their superior officers had encouraged them to mutiny. The two women were silent for a long time. And Frederick was in South America for several years. Yes, and now he's in Spain, somewhere near Cadiz. If he comes to England, he'll be hanged. I shall never see his face again. Mrs. Hale turned her face to the wall and lay very still. Nothing could be said to comfort her. When her father came in, Margaret left the room, seeing no promise of brightness anywhere. So that's the end of chapter 4. So I hope you like these two chapters. So we find out finally why we finally found out why Frederick was the reasons why Frederick can't come back to England. And looking at Mrs. Hale's health, then it's quite sad to know that she might not see her son again if she dies soon, or yeah. So that's something that I guess the mother would like to wish from her to see her son before she dies. If she dies, don't know, but she's not well. She's getting sicker and sicker, so it doesn't look very encouraging, and she doesn't seem to get better as well. Right. So I hope that you enjoyed this live reading, and that you want to discuss this novel with us at the book club. So make sure you subscribe to the book club and join our first workshop this Sunday. And don't be shy, join us, and I hope that you want to learn more this way about North and South, and just express your point of view. And please leave me a comment in the below this video, so that I can have an idea whether what you feel about the characters and about the story as a whole. So I wish you a beautiful end of the day, and I will see you next Wednesday live on Instagram here at 2 p.m. to read chapters 5 and 6. So it will be our third live reading session, and I hope that you will be there. And thank you again for watching this video, and thank you for being live as well, and I will see you next week. Bye bye.